All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us for our monthly webinar. This one's going to be a doozy, so strap in, we'll get going. We're going to talk about all different types of leave and how they work together here. And it's a lot to dive through, so we're going to get right in here. Before we get going, I do have the Q&A open. The chat is open. If I see things as we're going, we'll try to get those questions answered as we go. Otherwise, we'll address them kind of towards the end. We'll have time for Q&A at the end as well. As always, all of our webinars are recorded and we will have them posted probably sometime tomorrow on our YouTube channel. We always also send out a summary email afterwards with some resources and slide decks and so forth. So you'll have that as well. We're going to talk about some different tools within iSolved. If you already work with us, you have the access to most of those tools already. So as we're working through those things, we will talk through that. And as always, these webinars are not legal advice. You really should consult with your employment attorney or an HR consultant for any specific types of things. So, all right. So I'm Chris Clough. I'm usual host here. I also have Danielle with us. She is our HR consultant on our team. She's going to chime in and be our kind of expert Q&A person as we move through this as well. So we will dive right in. We're going to dive through each of the different kind of categories of leave. So we'll talk through different types of protected leave, things like FMLA, Maine paid family medical leave. That's the biggest interaction people are having questions about right now is paid family medical leave is new to most of us in Maine. And how does that interact with FMLA and everything else that goes along with it? So we'll definitely dive into that. We will talk about ADA accommodations, workers' comp. Then we'll go into some of the more voluntary types of leave, PTO, things like that. And then we'll really talk about how they all work together to pull it together. So let's dive right in. So we certainly know that this is complicated. That's why we're having this conversation today. There are more than a dozen different types of mandatory leave or leave categories. And of course, the legislatures around the country are really trying to do the best for the employees who work in every state. Now, this presentation, we're going to primarily be speaking about Maine. We will obviously talk about federal things. We're not going to really talk about any other states in this presentation. So if if you're looking for something else, uh, save yourself some time. We're just going to focus on Maine today, but they are not separate buckets. They overlap. There's a lot of ways that they interact, and we want to make sure that we are keeping track of them to do that. So let's dive right into those protected leaves. So we have federal and we have Maine family medical leave, right? So these are two separate laws. They work together, just like a lot of state and federal laws. Sometimes the state is more strict than the feds, and sometimes the feds is more strict than the state. We always take the most strict interpretation when we're looking at these things. So in Maine, Maine family medical leave comes into play when there are 15 or more employees at any given work site. Okay, so that's important to consider. Generally speaking, that is going to be more specific than federal FMLA, Family Medical Leave Act. And we certainly know FMLA is unpaid leave, unpaid but job protected leave for employees. So eligibility also has to be in the state of Maine 12 consecutive months with the same employer. From a federal perspective, that's 12 months and 1,250 hours. So generally speaking, Maine, again, is going to supersede the federal here. Where we get to the feds are going to supersede the state. We have up to 12 weeks of unpaid job protected leave in every 12-month period, whereas in the state, it's only 10 weeks every 2 years. So again, now we're going to revert to the federal policy where this is more strict, and we're going to follow that. There are specific rules for caregiver leave, for military caregiver leave under the federal policy, and there are some specific notice requirements in each, which are pretty similar. Employees should give up to 30 days notice as well. Maine also allows for a broader definition under the FMLA from a state perspective, which includes domestic partnerships, siblings, grandchildren are included in those, also covers organ donation in the ability to take time off for these purposes, right? So in addition to the federal items, which include, birth, adoption, fostering, health conditions, serious health conditions of a family member or the individual, and again, military service is in there as well. So these are the reasons under that you can take FMLA under the federal and state policy. And again, they work together because we have to take the most strict interpretation. Again, Both are unpaid. They can use PTO, they can use some disability, they can use PFML. And what we want to talk about, and we're going to talk about this a little bit further towards the end, is that we want these things to work concurrently, right? Rather than successively. We want them to be all happening at the same time. So we're going to use some of our unpaid and paid benefits at the same time and make sure that we're documenting everything appropriately. So we have the new PFML, Maine Paid Family Medical Leave. So lots to go through here. We certainly know we have all been contributing into the PFML program for the last year or so, a little over a year. And that's 1% of wages for employers over 15 employees and 0.5% of all wages under 15 employees. So that's the tax that goes in. All wages starting from day one go towards that in there. We have some W-2 reporting that we handle on our end. For that, we handle all the wages reporting and taxes for you. We're helping figure all of that out. Certainly, we know that there are private plans. We're going to talk a little bit about that in a second. But this is kind of the default rate. Benefits just began this month. So now employees can apply to use paid family medical leave. And this is a very broad definition of what that leave looks like. And employees can take that. We'll go through specifics here in just a second. But for things like bonding with a new child, caregiving, their own medical leave, safe leave, things like that. And they can start applying for that again, effective May 1st. They can take up to 12 weeks a year. Okay. And that can be from day one, right? So they come work for you really week one, they could come in and apply for that. However, their job is only protected if they have worked for 120 days for you. So if they come in and week one they use their PFML, you do not have to hold their job. If they work over 120 days, you do have to hold their job. Okay. There is a 7-day waiting period after they apply. So if they apply, there's always a 7-day waiting period, and then they will get the benefits. The formula is a little wonky. I'm not going to go into specifics on this, but essentially it's about 90% of the average state average weekly wage is what they can get from a maximum benefit perspective. So certainly, the calculation is a little bit tiered and, definitely is confusing. We have learned from the state that employees who work for multiple employers can combine their wages and their benefits under this formula. So if someone works two separate jobs, the state will go and combine their wages and figure out their benefit from that. We've also asked the question of the state, what happens when an employee works for two employers and needs to take leave from one but not the other? I got a little bit of a blank stare from the state when I asked that question because I don't think they thought about it yet. But we had a client that fell into. Their interpretation is that the work requirements are only under the lack of work requirements rather would be under the primary employer only, and they be able to continue to work their second job. So a little bit of gray area there. We don't have good details. I would hope and expect that we'll see some more of that as the program continues to roll out. I think the key distinction is this is not like unemployment where if you go back to work, you're going to get penalized. That seems to be the consensus that we got from the state. So that's, again, still a lot of information to figure out here as this program rolls out. I think it's the state's figuring it out along with everybody else, but they've done a pretty good job building the rules and the structure based on what other states have done. So lots more to come on PFML. And again, this is what we can do. Basically, the birth, adoption, foster within 12 months. You can also split most of these leaves up. So we have seen some folks where the mother might take the 12 weeks and then the father takes the next 12 weeks or something like that. You could also take 8 weeks and then 4 weeks, go back to working, take another 4 weeks later in the year. But again, it's basically any up to 12 weeks in the first 12 months. Okay, so family caregiving. This the definition of family under the state's definition is very broad. It's not just, close family. It does include anyone you have a significant personal bond with. So that's a pretty broad definition in terms of that. But definitely that is allowed as well. Certainly any employee's own medical issue, including pregnancy, prenatal care, birth, etc. Safe leave is allowed for domestic violence, sexual assault, or stalking, and then certainly military leave for a family pending military deployment. So those are all reasons that they could go apply for that. Let's look at how some of these things run together. Um, PFML and FMLA, we probably want to run these concurrently. Okay. So this is important because you don't want to potentially extends someone's leave period if you don't have to. A lot of this relies upon documentation. So you want to make sure if someone's going out on PFML, you want to document that they're also starting their FMLA at the same time. Let the clock start triggering at the same time, right? Go through that. If they're on workers' comp, FMLA could also run concurrently with that, any type of thing like that. The Americans with Disability Act probably is running afterwards. Those are exceptions and accommodations that you're making after they return to work potentially, or an extended leave of job protected leave, right? Usually a short or long-term disability would run at the same time as those FMLAs, right? So, we're using the job protections of FMLA, but we're using short-term disability to protect our income, very similar to Maine PFML, right? That's a form of short-term disability. We'll dive into a little bit more of that. And then certainly the paid time off, earned paid leave, anything you might have go towards that. A lot of times we're seeing clients top off benefits, right? So if you're on PFML or you are on short-term disability, something like that, we're seeing people that are topping off their earnings because they're not getting their full pay. That is allowed under PFML. So that is something we're seeing a lot of folks do. Or they may use, if they've got 2 weeks off or something like that, they may wait until the end of all their other benefits expire and use their PTO. We've got some graphics coming along that'll definitely talk about that as well. So many of you may have heard about private plan substitution. So you can go through and get a private short-term disability policy essentially to replace your main paid family leave requirements. Okay. Does not replace the reporting requirements. So we still have to report as your payroll provider. We have to report all the wages every quarter. We continue to do that. What it replaces really is the benefit piece. And you can apply for that. You have to have a substantially equivalent plan, which essentially means you have to provide the same leave reasons, same leave periods, same benefit amounts, and so forth in order for the state to approve you. I don't know how many, but I know there's a handful of plans that have been pre-approved by the state. Essentially, the state has reviewed them and says, "Yep, these are substantially equivalent," and pretty much that's all that's being approved right now. I know some of the bigger companies, the Fortune 500 companies, were talking about self-insuring and all sorts of other different things. The state did take some of that up in the legislature. I don't believe there was any resolution to those types of things this period, but there are conversations going on continuously about these plan substitutions. They do require approval, so obviously they have to be substantially equivalent. You, as the employer, have to go in and apply for the exclusion through the state's portal, just like where we've been reporting things. You go in there, you upload your plan documents, you pay your fee, of course, and that approval lasts for 3 years. So you can have that for 3 years. Again, reporting requirements remain the same. You have to go in and send off the wages, no tax, no premium in there. What we're seeing, however, and this has become a little more complicated than I think a lot of people thought. Typically, if you're a short-term disability plan, you report an average wage amount once a year. Yep, Susie makes $50,000 a year. That's what the premium and the benefit are based upon. What we're seeing with a lot of these private plans now is that they're requiring the employer to log into their website every month and report actual wages every month, and their premium and their billing is being based upon actual wages. And I think that's because the benefit has to be the same as the state, so there's more administrative burden with these. We've seen some significant savings, however. I will just say, paper trails, we went into a private plan. The cost is less than half of what we would be paying if we were going through the state's plan. So significant savings, but some more work from an admin perspective. Definitely worth looking at. I would say the clients we've talked to about private plan substitutions, generally speaking, the more turnover you have, the less it is, because again, you have to go and keep reporting and enrolling and managing that. Whereas we're managing all of that from you from a payroll perspective. But if you have a private plan, there's definitely some more work to be done. Think Every business needs to look at it and what benefits them the best. So let's dive into ADA. We know Americans with Disability Act allows for reasonable accommodations. The federal law applies to anyone with 15 or more employees, but essentially in Maine, Maine Human Rights Act requires all employers with even one employee to basically follow these types of rules. So um, there are a ton of rules around ADA. We're not going to get into every minute detail, but essentially we know that you have to provide a reasonable accommodation or reasonable leave when their illness or disability prevents them from working, right? There is no cap on ADA reasonable accommodations. There is no cap on the time period that this could last for, right? If you have someone out on ADA, permanently, the big thing with ADA is document, 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 document. Okay. These really need to be documented well because, again, timeline is important, but also you need to be engaging in good faith dialogues with your employee consistently. If they go out and 6 months passes and you haven't talked to them, that's a problem. You want to make sure that you are keeping in communication with them. Is it time for them to terminate leave? Terminate their position, whatever. You can't do that, but they could resign, things like that. Um, you know, this typically picks up after FMLA ends, right? So we have a lot of those things that are up to 12 weeks. Typically, we're going to bring you back either slowly or we're going to bring you back, you know, in a few months or whatever, using that documentation to make sure that, again, we are following the law and providing what we need to do. So we know that, again, we don't want to auto terminate after FMLA ends. This isn't an all or nothing. This could be intermittent. This could be modified duty. This could be, if you're a nurse, this could be desk work, right? That is an accommodation or a reduction of hours. Those are the big things. And again, this is pretty broad, so covers a lot of things. But again, not engaging and not documenting are the biggest issues that you're going to have under ADA. Workers' comp, everyone is required. If you have one or more employee, you are required in the state of Maine to carry workers' comp insurance and provide workers' comp coverage. This is for any injury happening in the workplace, injury or illness happening in the workplace. These policies generally provide for about two-thirds average weekly wage coverage in the event of injury or illness. And there could be benefits for permanent impairment or death if those are out there, right? So employers have to report these injuries to the workers' comp company within 7 days. You have to maintain their position during a reasonable recovery, and not retaliate them. So if they fall off the ladder and break their leg, you do have to maintain that position while they're going through recovery, things like that. You have to have those conversations about light duty return to work. Again, very similar to ADA. And again, we want to coordinate these with FMLA, PFML, short-term disability. There is the potential to top off some of those other items with workers' comp, right? So, think about those. And again, we want those happening concurrently, right? We want the FMLA conversation and the PFML and the workers' comp coverage all be happening at the same time, right? Um, Short-term disability has changed a lot now um, with the PFML. A lot of these policies are essentially top-off policies now, which say, okay, we'll give you the extra amount of your wage. Premiums have substantially decreased on those, and I would definitely talk about those with your broker when you have those conversations. So, all right, let's dive into paid time off. So some of these are required, some of these are at your discretion. Maine earned paid leave. You, as a Maine employer with 10 or more employees, you must provide 1 hour of PTO for every 40 hours of work, up to 40 hours in a year. So if someone's working full time for you, they're going to hit their 40-hour earned paid leave amount probably sometime August, September. If they're part-time, obviously that's prorated because this is every fraction of an hour they work, they get that accrual as well. So this is the minimum standard, okay? So if you have a PTO policy in place already or vacation policy, you're probably going to have to make a change because they have to be able to take leave for any reason. So we have seen substantial changes to folks' PTO policies. Most people aren't using a vacation or a sick policy anymore. They're just going to kind of a PTO so that they're in compliance with earned paid leave. Because again, They have to be able to use this time for any reason. Injury, illness, sudden necessity, could be planned, unplanned. Basically, if they need a personal day, doctor's visit, whatever, even if it's a vacation, they can use that for that. You can limit when they can use it, right? So they cannot use it, or you can set it so they cannot use it for after 120 days. So if someone starts, you don't have to worry about them taking 8 hours on the first week or whatever. There is some restriction and some accommodation there. They are supposed to provide you with reasonable notice, and you as an employer are allowed to help schedule and plan these things. However, the law says if it's an emergency and pretty much fails to define what that means, they can take it at any time for any reason. So there's some risk in terms of scheduling and so forth there to think about. And again, I just want to reiterate, your existing PTO policy really needs to meet these minimum requirements. And that's what we're seeing a lot of folks get tripped up on is, oh my gosh, I have a PTO policy that gives my employees 120 hours a year, but they aren't allowed to use it for X, Y, and Z. Or you're restricting when they can take it, right? We had a client we had a conversation with recently who said, no, we close for 1 week in the winter and everyone has to use their earned paid leave that 1 week. Well, you can't do that, right? They have to be able to use it anytime for any reason. They could take that 1 week unpaid if they wanted and take, a day in July and a day in September and whatever. So those are some what is tripping up employers. Big change to this is now carryover, right? So the legislature passed an update to this, and now previously employers did not have to allow carryover, okay? They could if they wanted to, but they didn't have to. Now the law has been changed so that the employees must be able to carry over up to 40 hours and still accrue an additional 40 hours in the next year. So if I'm Bob, that works at, whatever machine shop, and I don't use my 40 hours in 2025, I have to be able to carry over my 40 hours and then I can start accruing another 40 hours in 2026. And potentially, if I get to September and I have 80 hours in the bank, I could use those 80 hours to do that, right? And again, that would have to roll over again, potentially, only be 40 hours, right? But they could potentially keep carrying over that 40 hours of unused time. So that's a big change to the policy and the law. One thing that trips some folks up is the payout of this needs to be on their base rate of pay. And that's not necessarily their hourly wage. There's a little bit of a look back that has to go in there. If there are multiple rates of pay that were paid in the last paycheck, or commissions or non-discretionary bonuses, this is very similar to how blended overtime is calculated. Essentially, you have to go back and look at their base rate of pay for the prior period, which again is a blended rate of anything and everything they were paid. So if you're a server or and a host, get paid two different rates, something like that, or you get a commission of some sort, that's your base rate of pay. So you would have to pay this Maine earned paid leave out at that base rate of pay. It's a little bit quirky, but there's potentially some pitfalls there with people with more complicated situations. So seasonal employers are exempted, but only if they are open less than 120 days, which generally speaking in the state of Maine, we see very few businesses now that are less than that. So, and again, that hourly rate thing trips people up as well, and also that coordination between your current policies are big issues. So, I have a question. If your company's sick policy is a max of 40 hours per calendar year, you aren't required to allow the use of anything over 40, even if the employees roll it over. So I would say, first of all, sick policy is a concern. You want to look at that because this is for more than just sick. They have to be able to use this for any reason, including vacation, personal days, anything like that. Second, the state has issued guidance in their FAQs on their website that says they can use that total of 180 hours, 80 hours in that. So that is something that they did just release earlier this year, and hopefully that they'll continue to refine that. So I think there is the ability for them to use that. The law was very vague on that, and Department of Labor did essentially say, yep, they can use it. If they've got it, they can use it. What else, right? What other types of leave might you offer as an employer, right? So we have our PTO. We've talked a lot about that. A lot of these, if you're meeting the bare minimum of what is required under earned paid leave, you have the ability to kind of build whatever you want, right? We've seen folks, and again, in every different industry that are building different types of PTO or other time off policies. We see a lot of volunteer hours that are coming through. That's a new thing a lot of folks are doing, providing hours for people to go volunteer. Um, Lots of different things there. One caveat in the state of Maine is if you have a policy that is called vacation and you have 11 or more employees, you have to pay out their vacation time only if they have any unused time and they leave, right? If voluntary separation, involuntary separation, if they leave your employment and they have money in their vacation bucket, you got to pay it out. So we that is a further reason that we are seeing people not offer vacation sick type buckets anymore. We are seeing a lot of people just go to PTO straight across the board because they can control the payout. I did call Department of Labor and ask them if they have something that is not called vacation, do you have to pay it out? And the answer was no. It is the way the law is written. If uh, they have vacation only, anything called vacation needs to be paid out. Okay. Short and long-term disability, these are private plans, private insurance plans that you can get. They will supplement wages, for folks that are out. These are private plans you can go buy out there. Again, benefits that people have been offering for years and years. Every policy is different. Sometimes employees contribute, sometimes it's 100% employer paid. Uh, the benefits vary on percentage of wages, how long they last. It's really, kind of however you want to build it, right? So work with your benefits broker to figure those out. These are not mandatory. There's, again, a lot of times they might top off PFML or other types of benefits. That's the new flavor that we're seeing with those short-term disability policies is they're saying, yeah, don't cancel your short-term disability policy. Let's use it to supplement what you already have. Um, so. Other types of potentially mandatory leave or not, we see a lot of folks giving bereavement time. Again, this is pretty much up to you what you want to allow. Obviously, document your policies. So if you allow for bereavement time, or if you say, hey, if you want to take bereavement time, you have to use your PTO or your unpaid leave. But say that in your policy, right? Obviously, if it's not documented, it didn't happen. So be sure that you're following that. It is not required by law. Generally speaking, we're seeing a handful of days for immediate family. That's up to you, what you might be looking for. Also, we may see, some folks that are giving additional time for unpaid time if they want it or need it, kind of thing like that. But if they have time off available, you have to let them use it for that as well. Again, under that Maine earned paid leave. So keep that in mind. Jury duty is required. You are required to give them the time off for jury duty. However, you don't have to pay employees, okay? You also cannot terminate them. You cannot retaliate against them for having jury duty. You can require proof of service. We are seeing a lot of folks who are out there and allowing people to use their earned paid leave. Again, they have to be able to use their earned paid leave, but they could also be using other types of PTO to pay this. We have some clients we've seen who will top off the jury duty pay, right? That's your civic duty. If you're out for jury duty for 2 weeks and the state pays you $300, we'll pay you the difference, right? Totally up to you, but you do have to allow them to take the time off. You just don't have to pay them unless you want to. Military leave, you do have to provide up to 5 years of military leave. Does have to be job protected, so forth, and you have to give them their same role. Maine also requires this same leave for National Guard folks, so keep that in mind as well. All right, now we're going to talk about how these things all kind of merge together. This is kind of the big thing um, that we've all been waiting for here. We're getting to the grand finale. So the biggest thing, again, document, 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 document. Make sure that you have any of these types of mandatory things in writing. You are having these conversations. Again, have the conversations about what your accommodations are, what their leaves are, and document them, right? Document your conversations, document you had them. All those things are going to protect you and the employee when it comes down to. So want to think about what they're going to use, right? We're going to start the FMLA clock and the PFML clock at the same time. We want to figure out what they can and cannot use. The want to make sure that whatever they're using for paid time is stacking up and topping off and all that stuff. Again, make sure that's in your handbook. Very important. And again, ADA may pick up where a lot of this stuff ends off. So let's look at some timelines here. So in our example here, Sarah's having a baby. She has worked for the company for 3 years, so we know she's has her service in there. Company has 60 employees. We know she's eligible for FMLA, PFML, Americans with Disability Act, and has PTO, right? And they also have a short-term disability policy. So we got a lot going on here, a lot of complications uh, in our policy and the law. Then Sarah has complications. She's gonna have a C-section. She needs some extra time off. Okay. Let's look at how these things are going to run if we run them concurrently and document them. Okay. So week one, FMLA starts, PFML starts. There, your job protected leave essentially is that 12 weeks. Okay. And it is paid because it is FMLA. The company has a short-term disability policy as well. In this situation, their short-term disability policy only covers 6 weeks and is topping off the PFML. So essentially, Sarah is going to be paid 100% for the first 6 weeks, which is wonderful for her. Then she's going to have an additional 6 weeks at whatever she's going out on from that point on will be protected and paid under PFML only. Then she gets to the end where she's got some PTO to use. She wants to use that PTO to get full pay for weeks 13 and 14. And she's going to be out for a little bit longer. And we're going to use ADA to protect her job and create reasonable accommodations for that return to work weeks 15 and 16, where she's going to come back part-time, say. So lots and lots and lots of things interacted here. And certainly we want to try to run things as concurrently as possible. If they don't run concurrently, right, we're potentially, when we talk about the concurrently piece, really has to do with documentation, right? So if you don't document that Sarah is going out on FMLA at the same time she's going out of PFML, she potentially could go out for up to 26 weeks, whereas before we were at 14 weeks, right? So really important to do that. It just extends the calendar. So that's a couple of examples, things, takeaways from this, right? The big one, big one, big one. I've said it, if I've said it once, I've said it a million times, and this is the key rule of HR: document, 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 right? If it's not in writing, it didn't happen. And particularly with these leaves, and you're going to want to keep those calendars up to date. When did they go out on FMLA? When did the calendars start ticking, right? So after this webinar, go out there, make sure you have a note for yourself. Make sure you have the PFML written notice in your handbook. So there is a requirement now. The state requires you to notify your employees of their eligibility for PFML and how it all works. The state does have two templates, one for a private plan, one for the state plan. We've just started incorporating those into the handbook, right? That's your obligation of notice if you're putting in your handbook. Some folks are separating it out, just giving them the individual document. We're saying might as well just put it in the handbook. So make sure that written notice is in there. And if you need that link, just go out to the state's PFML website. It's right under employer resources, I believe. Again, in your handbook, make sure that you have, how you're going to calculate all these different types of leads, whether they be concurrent or not. We recommend run them concurrently. Want to make sure PTO also how that works, if there are, top offs available or not. Make sure you're having that conversation. Anytime that you're having ADA type conversations, make sure you are documenting those and making sure everything is in writing and acknowledged by the employee. Training always is a big one, right? If someone wants to take leave, make sure the managers are trained on when they can and cannot say no. That's a big one. We don't want to say someone needs to go out for a reasonable accommodation or whatever. Don't just say no, right? Or fire them, even worse, right? So make sure your whole team is on board with that. New one for this year, right? Those of you that have a short-term, long-term disability policy, have a conversation with your benefits broker. Make sure that the plans have been updated in a way that avoids potential duplicate payments. You don't want to have a short-term disability policy that's going to pay 80% if the state's paying 90%, right? I mean, think about that and how that interacts. Most brokers have been pretty proactive about this, but think about that for sure. So again, make sure your unpaid leave policy is up to date and any PTO policies match what the minimum requirements are. And make sure you're paying attention to that carryover period because that's important as well. And obviously, handbook, that is usually the Bible. We've Danielle and her team constantly are working on these types of things that we're hearing from clients every day. I don't want my handbook to be that complicated. I don't want my handbook to be that long. Unfortunately, we have a dozen different types of things to do with just this one policy, or excuse me, one area of law, and it's getting more and more complicated every single day. So hopefully we've got some takeaways for you after this. So happy to answer questions. Our next webinar is going to be Employee Management 101. That's an iSolve kind of training. We'll go through and just show how that works, give you hopefully some tips and tricks on how to make that work. Obviously, register for that webinar at papertrails.com/webinars. And certainly always, if you have questions, specific questions about your business, you can reach out to us directly. But let's see what we've got in the Q&A. We had one question that Danielle answered perfect. What would it look like if an employer offers 8 weeks of paid maternity leave? How would PFML work with that? Would we get the 90% plus 8 weeks? So that is kind of up to you, right? So this is also a change that folks are having to make in their policies, right? If you're offering family leave or parental leave, either for the man or the woman, spouse, whatever you're doing, you want to adjust that, right? So sometimes we've seen some clients who are saying, we will top off your pay for those 12 weeks and give you an additional however many weeks, right? If you think that's important. We've seen folks that have say, I will just top off 8 weeks. We will see folks that have said, I will top off the full 12 weeks. We have seen folks that will say, I'm not offering parental leave anymore. The state PFML or our private PFML plan will supplement that. So there are no requirements other than allowing them to take it from a PFML perspective to how you can handle that. That's up to you and how you want to build that around there. So military annual drills, those are very similar to that National Guard. Those you can use sick leave for and job protected. If an employee is out on workers' comp, should I have required use under FMLA? Can I go back and file the documents? Can the employee save FMLA for another purpose? Danielle, what do you think about that one? In terms if um, they're on workers' comp, when does FMLA start and when does that?
So my opinion would be that their workers' comp could run concurrent with FMLA. However, if you didn't do that from day one, then I wouldn't go back. I would just notify them from the start to start running FMLA concurrent with your workers' comp injury. So I wouldn't go back. I would start it fresh.
Perfect.
Yeah, let's see. Can the employee save FMLA for another purpose or injury? That's a good one. I don't recommend that they save it. I recommend as an employer, you start running their FMLA concurrently. Because if you don't run it concurrently, then they get an additional 12 weeks. So your employee could be out for potentially 24 weeks. And if you really need that position, then you'd have to backfill it with something else. So I would recommend that not saving FMLA. I would recommend that you start it running concurrently for the 12 weeks and then have them take an unpaid leave of absence, but then their job's not protected and you
Perfect.
can backfill.
If we have an employee who wants to take unpaid leave in addition to this, how does that work? And specifically regarding benefits. So if they don't need any specific accommodation under ADA, that's up to you, right? If they've exhausted all of their, allowed leave under these rules, if you want to give them an additional 2 months off unpaid, that's totally up to you. One of the things we didn't cover in this, and I should have added this in there, is the benefits, right? How do you handle benefits when all these are interacting, right? If you have an employee out and they have health insurance, for example, what do you do? We see most employers continue to provide coverage. You are allowed to do that. If someone's out on paid family medical leave for 12 weeks, continue to provide coverage. If you are requiring them to contribute, there are two options. One is they could prepay through payroll deduction before they leave. They could pay everything back when they return. That's a little riskier. Those are two options. The other option we've seen some folks do is the employee writes the company a check to cover the benefits while they're out. They lose a little bit of the tax benefit because you wouldn't be able to run that through a pre-tax deduction, so to speak. Um, but we've seen people do that as well. I've also seen people when they go out on leave, they'll suspend the benefits for that period. Um, again, I think you have to make that distinction and determination when um, you're writing your policies and how you want to handle that. If someone goes out on unpaid leave of absence and you don't know when they're going to return, probably going to want to terminate benefits at that point would be my recommendation. But um, generally speaking, when we're seeing folks go out on leave, you're not terminating coverage in that. So. For Maine earned paid leave being calculated from the week immediately before leave. What if the employee did not work the week before? To base it off the last week that they did work? Yes. So if they did not work if they took PTO this week, you would have to go back 2 weeks if they didn't work last week. The other distinction is they must make minimum wage. So we see that a lot in service industries, restaurants, hospitality, where they're making that tipped rate. You must pay them the minimum wage rate if they are not otherwise being considered. The other thing, service charges are calculated as part of that base rate. So if they are getting that 20% auto gratuity, that is a non-discretionary compensation, and that is required to be calculated as part of their normal rate. Tips are not, voluntary tips are not, but service charges are. What is the look back period for PTO? I'm not sure. Give me a little more context around the look back period for PTO, what you're looking for there. If you're an owner, can you take FMLA, say, for knee surgery? Sure. Well, if you're an owner, all FMLA does is protect you, right? Protects your job. And if you're the owner, I don't think you're going to fire yourself. So certainly you could definitely go out for 12 weeks. If you're asking about the paid family medical leave under Maine, yes. If you are contributing, if you are on payroll, you are absolutely allowed to use PFML benefits as the owner. Your salary is going to be capped at the same wage as everybody else. So if you're paying yourself a lot of money, you may not get as much, but you certainly could use the benefit under PFML if you are. The state of Maine on that does allow self-employed individuals. So these are people running a sole proprietorship, an LLC sole prop, who may not be on payroll. You can or do not have payroll. You can opt into the state's PFML program. You do have to pay tax premium into the plan, but you could potentially, if you are, a massage therapist, you work for yourself, you're a sole proprietor, you could pay into the program and receive benefits if you want. For earned paid leave tipped employee rate, if you're paying out the rate of $25 an hour, which is more than the tipped rate, should be factoring it differently than a flat rate. So if Jane makes $8.38 an hour serving and $20 an hour food running, you would need to blend that rate together, Lindsay. So I don't know how many hours that person was working in each. It would have to be over minimum wage, I will tell you that. So if they work 38 hours at 8.38 and 2 hours at 20, you may still have to bump them up to the minimum wage. But you have to take that and blend those hours together, also including any service charges that would be in there, blend it all together, divided by the number of hours worked, and that would be your normal rate. If an employee is approved for and using the Maine paid leave, do I still have to fill out FMLA paperwork for it to count as running concurrently? Yes, you should document that they are starting their FMLA at the same time. That they are going out on PFML, right? So if they're going out on PFML, you want to put something in the file that says Susie's going out on PFML. We are starting her FMLA protected period as of today. And there's no FMLA paperwork to file per se. It's really your own documentation. You're not filing anything with FMLA police saying we're starting this. This is just you going out there and saying, we're gonna start this calculation today. If Department of Labor comes back and gets audited or the employee complains, that's generally the FMLA police. But there's nothing active in terms of other than documenting it on our own. Talking about the look back period for PTO. So look back period for the base rate, just kind of talked about that, is the most recent pay period, right? So if they didn't work last week, it'd be the week before. And that's how you calculate that base rate. So really good questions. Leave it. I don't see anything else. Popping right up. Leave the Q&A and the chat open for another minute or so. And certainly, if you have any specific questions about your individual situation, reach out to us. We're happy to talk about those. What happens to the temp hire once the PFML employee returns to work? I'm wondering if the temp will qualify for unemployment. If they have worked, so if you bring in a temp to cover a position while someone's out on PFML, first of all, earned paid leave applies to all of those folks. So you have to allow them to start accruing time. So that's one thing to consider. Will they qualify for unemployment? Potentially. Under Maine unemployment law, if you work for someone for more than 5 weeks and you terminate them, or someone works for you for more than 5 weeks and you terminate them, pretty safe to assume that they are going to be eligible for unemployment, yes. Any other questions? This was a good one. I know it's pretty complicated, so we're always happy to chat. Uh, Certainly, we'll hope to see you all next month, June 16th, 2 o'clock, same time, same channel. And thank you so much, everyone. Have a great afternoon.